Came to Taiwan to get knee surgery. I was in a lot of pain, physical pain in the airplane. My knee was quite swollen, but I had to somehow endure a 12 and a half hour airplane ride with no opportunity to lie down. My leg was throbbing the entire time, and I found little relief in pills, meals, or movies. Pain is one thing, and suffering is another. In life, pain is a given. Our bodies are magnets for pain. From the moment we're born, we leave the warm but cramped womb of a mother and are squeezed out through the birth canal, naked and cold and longing to be fed and comforted. Growing up, we endure sickness, unpleasant encounters with bullies, testing anxiety in school or peer pressure, social anxiety of many varieties, perhaps low self-esteem, doubt, worry, and so our life goes. Even if we enjoy times of pleasure, good food, comfortable surroundings, friends who speak kind words about us, vacations, and even meditation retreats, nothing is stable as long as our minds remain under the influence of ignorance, anger, and attachment. External conditions change, sensory pleasures run their course, and then end, and then dissatisfaction arises again. This is what is meant by dukkha, which is the first noble truth. Everything, all phenomena of body and mind, regarding the nature of reality, is contaminated by this suffering. It's important here not to misunderstand the truth of suffering as an absolute truth. In the West, many people mistakenly hear teachings on suffering and think, how depressing, and turn the other way, not realizing that by naming the problem, it is implied that there is a way out of suffering, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, the fourth Noble Truth. Yes, it is not initially pleasant to face the truth of suffering, but by accepting the reality of existence, true freedom and peace is possible in the present moment. This does not mean that because suffering pervades unenlightened existence, that we ignore our health and think, what's the use? Ignoring the recommendations of our doctor and the possibilities for seeking palliative care. That attitude represents a slippery slope into nihilism, which is the complete opposite of what Buddha taught. Our life does matter. Our actions do matter. Mind not completely purified of ignorance and delusion inevitably experiences suffering and creates the karmic causes for more suffering. But we can also create the causes for freedom by understanding suffering and beginning to transcend it. In a way, I am very grateful for my most recent experience of physical pain and illness because it offers me the opportunity to practice letting go, a dress rehearsal for death, you might say. The day before my total knee replacement surgery, I went for a walk in the morning, moving slowly with my crutches. Outside the Jing Sitang temple, my wife told me that the Mandarin words mean peaceful contemplation place. If you train your mind in the Lam Rim, the gradual path to enlightenment, then when the mind is still, it begins to understand the nature of freedom, which is all about letting go, the third noble truth. Anger, attachment, and all the delusions which derive from them. We begin to see that everything is the result of karmic causes. Past karma produces present results. Present actions produce future results. As long as our mind does not see the truth of emptiness clearly, every action of our body, speech, and mind no matter whether it is virtuous or non-virtuous, produces karma to be reborn in samsara, the cycle of problems. Samsara isn't an external place, but an internal description of our mind under the influence of delusion. In the Heart Sutra, it says there is no suffering that's complete freedom. Then why does the Lam Rim have several different lists of suffering? The 3 sufferings, 6 sufferings, and I think 8 sufferings. I remember the 3. There is the suffering of suffering, which is easy to understand. That's what I'm mostly going through right now with recovering from surgery and the swelling in my knee and incision. But even a tiny insect bite in our sleep creates an ouch sensation, and then we have a welt that itches for days. So that's easy to understand. Or someone says something unkind, and the words cause us to feel emotional pain. That's suffering too. More subtle is the suffering of change, the second kind of suffering. We eat something that tastes delicious on the tongue. It sends signals to our brain that we are being nourished, which brings a primal satisfaction. But if we keep eating, eventually that experience changes. It no longer satisfies, and eventually we get a tummy ache. When we are 18 years old, assuming we are healthy, our body feels comfortable most of the time. But at 64 years old, our joints begin to ache, and simple motions we used to take for granted are no longer easy. We are cold, so we put on more clothes, but then we become hot and have to take off clothes, and so on. Change is a constant, hence the importance of mindfulness in our daily life. Observing the constantly changing experience of the body and mind without reacting out of ignorance, anger, or delusion. The most subtle kind of suffering is all-pervasive suffering, which simply means being born under the influence of the delusions. As long as we haven't purified the mind of ignorance, then every experience we have, every action we take, will be tainted, creating negative karma and more suffering. Why do we say negative karma? It's not a moral judgment of good or bad. Negative simply means that the result will be suffering. So suffering does not exist conventionally, but once the mind has purified itself of all ignorance and can perceive emptiness directly, then the suffering is just merely labor. We no longer identify a solid sense of self that personalizes and owns the suffering. In theory, this may sound straightforward, but when the pain is 10 on a scale of 10, that is the real test of how well established one's view of emptiness is. As one teacher once remarked, we start practicing with the 5 and 10 pound weights at first. We don't try to lift 800 pounds unless we have trained for a long time. That's what analgesics are for. If the pain is too much to handle, there's no point in trying to tough it out, because it just generates a lot of aversion. There's no merit badge for how much pain you can handle. What matters is what's going on inside within the mind. When adversity strikes in life, the wise practitioner embraces and it seeks to deepen one's understanding of the 4 noble truths. This is suffering. Suffering has causes. There is an end to suffering. There is a path of practice leading to the end. It is said that the human realm is the best place to be able to achieve liberation and enlightenment. In the God realms, it's too easy to forget about Dharma practice, and we simply wallow about in the bliss of higher states of concentration for eons. In the lower realms, the suffering and ignorance overwhelms our mind, blocking any opportunity to hear or contemplate teachings. But in the human realm, we have just the right mix of pleasure, giving us the freedom and mindset to practice. and the pain, which keeps us from getting lazy and also helps us develop compassion for the three kinds of suffering in all living beings, which is absolutely necessary if we seek full enlightenment and not mere personal liberation from samsara. So this is our life homework, to investigate this truth of suffering so that it is fully understood, so that we abandon the causes and practice the Eightfold Path, so that we can realize cessation in conjunction with bodhicitta and then attain full Buddhahood. What are these five aggregates affected by clinging? The body and mind under the influence of ignorance, attachment, and anger. We need these five aggregates in order to practice, in order to function in the conventional world, but we don't need to carry them around as a solid, inherently existent I, me, and mine. That is the load we need to put down in order to be free. So a hospital room is a very amazing place to do practice. The mind is constantly challenged not to get stuck in habitual samsaric thinking, to be mindful of the delusions and make a clean break as soon as you see them rising. Pain levels are constantly fluctuating. After a morphine injection, a feeling of smoothness and ease quickly pervades the body, but the mind soon becomes dull and fuzzy. So there is both satisfaction and disappointment mixed together. And in any case, feeling is one of the five aggregates of clinging. Pleasure eventually turns to pain. One trains not to hold on to anything. More subtle than feelings are various mental states and thoughts. A common internal refrain I hear from my monkey mind several times a day is something like, when will I be leaving the hospital and going home? Implied in that self-talk is a certain level of dissatisfaction with continuing to stay in the hospital. I share the room with three other families. There are long sessions of snoring behind my curtain, groans, coughs, and other unpleasant sounds, even with a beautiful view of forested mountains and sky out the window. A lingering dissatisfaction remains. And boredom. Wrapped up in all that conceptual packaging are several afflictive emotions, but central to all of them is the strong adherence to the conception of a solid, inherently existent I who owns the feelings, who owns his body, who should have control over his destiny, his destiny. This attachment and ignorance are the fundamental delusions which cause us to be unhappy and suffer, not only in the present moment, always tweaking our samsara or conditional existence, trying to get it just right. So we must observe carefully and realize how these habitual motions and ignorance lead us astray down a path that cyclically repeats itself over and over again. That is the meaning of samsara, cyclic existence. And that is what we must investigate in our daily practice so that we can understand it clearly in order to be liberated from it. Due to this magnificent, attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi moon have upon the rising glow. In the snowy mountain paradise, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful tingling guilt searching is you. May you stay until samsara ends. embodiment of the three divine refuges who blesses all. Again, then Tenzin, holder of the teachings, may your lifespan last for eternity. May your excellent deeds pervade all of time and space, and continue so open for the nourishment of myself and all lives. Hope to see you next week at the same time.